Alright, ladies and gents, so I had originally planned to have a new video out in time for Halloween. I had a couple right at the finish line when my computer decided to shit the bed, and I lost the projects. So, we're going to do something a little bit different instead. The PS1 was the first console that I had. My buddy's dad gave it to me when they got a new PS2, and I spent hours in front of that thing. So I have played this one before. A lot of people think Call of Duty was the start of the World War II trend in FPS games, when the truth is, Medal of Honor inspired most of those early games. Some people get all choked up and pout that Wolfenstein was the inspiration for the first wave of World War II games, but they'd be wrong. Back in 1999, Medal of Honor was developed by DreamWorks Interactive. The concept was conceived by none other than Steven Spielberg after watching his son play GoldenEye, and is said to be influenced by his time working on Saving Private Ryan, which is probably true, because he had the same military advisor that he used in the film for this game. The game was heavily criticized because of the Columbine shooting, and it also faced some backlash from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society for making a video game out of something as serious as war, which almost led to the cancellation of the project. To inject a bit of realism, DreamWorks added some old footage to the game to give it more of a historical basis. In the end, the game was endorsed by the Medal of Honor Society's president. I'm playing this through DuckStation, and overall it went pretty well. I tried using my original PS1 controller because I wanted to relive my youth and, a little bit of nostalgia, but I couldn't get that figured out, so I ended up using an Xbox One controller, and it made the game way easier than I remember. The only real issue I had was some drifting while aiming. The game takes place near the end of World War II, and you play as Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson, and you're recruited by the Office of Strategic Services. The OSS was an actual intelligence agency during the war, and the predecessor to the CIA. By the end of the game, Jimmy's more infamous than 007.
Jimmy Patterson. Jimmy Patterson.
Anyway, you end up taking part in 7 missions in this one. Most of those missions end up in some form of sabotage, whether it's a German U-boat, a chemical weapons plant, or a giant railgun. Some real spy shit. The game is not the most pretty. Everything is low poly, the textures are rough, and the draw distance is very short, so there tends to be a lot of black space on the screen. Sometimes you'll clip through the hedgerows or other parts of the environment, and every once in a while an enemy will just randomly spawn in next to you. In spite of all of its flaws, it's still a really good game, and nothing is game-breaking. Each of the missions is split into a few sections divided by a loading screen, and before each of these sections you get a bit of a briefing as to what you can expect to run into, right down to press this button to do this. Once you're into the mission, you can press the start button to review your objectives, and because Medal of Honor is so linear, you know exactly what you need to do next, and if you happen to miss an objective, it's very obvious what part of the map you should go back to and explore. The movement isn't too bad, much easier on a modern controller. The aiming is still clunky though. No ADS here. Instead you get this thin red crosshair that stops all other movement when you pull it up. Not bad because the enemies usually have some sort of response time before they start shooting at you. And you can always back up to give yourself a little bit more time. I do feel the point of impact is a little high and to the right, especially with the machine guns. The enemy AI isn't the best. The pathfinding can be a bit rough, but it works most of the time. Then there's also the fact that you can get into a firefight without immediately alerting everyone in the area. And if it looks like I'm trying to shoot everyone in the dick, it's because I am. One of the great features of Medal of Honor is how the enemies react to getting hit. Shoot them in the arm, they wince in pain. Aim a little bit too high on the head and it takes their helmet off. Shoot them in the dick and, well, some of the enemy movement is pretty good too. Sometimes the enemies will go prone and roll around, or sidestep while unloading on you with a machine gun. At the end of each mission, you'll get a performance evaluation, just a rundown of your mission stats, but you also get a gunnery evaluation. 9 times out of 10, you'll get something to do with the arms. Another nice touch is the save menu. You choose your name on an old school typewriter, the save file shows up on this index card. It's nothing high tech, but it does add a little something. The enemy roster early on is basic, just different variations of riflemen. You might come across one on a mounted machine gun and they'll shred through your health pretty quickly, but it's usually easy to get the drop on them. Some of the Gestapo will have MP40s, and you add it to your arsenal when you kill one of them. The other enemy of Mission 1 is the dogs. Down in the sewers, these yellow-eyed bastards can make things a bit tricky. They move pretty quickly, and at the start of the level you only have the M1 Garand, the MP40, and some grenades. Don't use the grenades on the dogs though, because it turns into a game of fetch. It's a nice touch, really. And again, all of this is a lot easier on a modern controller. Partway through this map you'll find the shotgun. just a good old trench gun, makes the dogs a cakewalk, and thankfully this is the only time the dogs show up in this game. In the second mission, which happens to be my favorite, you're tasked with taking out the railgun Greta. The game introduces a new mechanic here, and it might even be the first of its kind. You'll go undercover for the first part of this mission, working your way through a train station, flashing your papers to get past checkpoints. You'll have to kill specific targets to get new papers to progress into new areas. It's a fun time, but not without its flaws. Sometimes you can spam the button to show the papers and the guards won't acknowledge it, so they just sound the alarm and attack you. It also doesn't make a whole lot of sense that you'll be turned away at first, but return with a new set of papers and be let through. I guess it's better than getting pigeonholed into having to do everything in the correct order, but it's still a little bit odd. If you're made in any way, the guards will sound the alarm. You can kill them and shut it off, and everyone else in the area forgets that the alarm was even going off in the first place and ignores the fact that there was a firefight just down the hall. In this mission, you also get your hands on the sniper rifle, and it's not the easiest thing to use because the scope zooms to 100% all the time, but it does get the job done. And then there's the little details in this level, like the night sky lighting up when the artillery is firing in the distance. Yeah, this is my favorite mission in the game right here. I guess one thing I should talk about here is the score in this game. Michael Giacchino put together the soundtrack for this game, and it is absolutely incredible. I mean, just listen to some of this. Not only is the music good, DreamWorks took advantage of the extra disc space and made the gunfire in this game top tier. Everything has a really punchy sound, and the bar sounds absolutely devastating. I mean, it should be, being a full auto 30-06. The only thing I wish they had in this game is the iconic ping from the Garand. Big miss there. The next couple missions are more of the same. Fight your way into an area, try not to get melted by machine gun nests, blow some shit up, and escape. The enemies do get a bit more challenging as you progress, mostly because they're armed with better weapons. At first, it's just a bunch of guys with machine guns, then come the guys with the Panzerschrecks. Pretty much one-shot kill no matter how you slice it. Sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll kill themselves, but most times it's just death. And there is a quirk where you can't shoot through the enemy in his death animation, but his buddy can fire rockets through, so that's fun. Also, the speed at which they fire these things would make you think that they're belt-fed. Then there's Germany's most effective soldier. Mission 6 changes the plot a bit. Instead of blowing shit up, now you're trying to prevent the Germans from destroying a bunch of stuff. And this is where the difficulty peaks. Guys with Panzerschrecks everywhere. Now the enemies will also respawn in areas that you've already been in and come up behind you, which is awesome when they can one-shot kill you. In Mission 7, you're back to blowing shit up, and this time it's a V2 rocket facility. Again, lots of guys with rocket launchers here, but easy enough to get through. Get to the end, launch the rocket, and watch the scientists run around before they end up getting wrecked. While we're at it, let's go through the next game in the series. The theme of this channel is playing games I've never played before, and while I have played Underground before, I've never actually beat it. Why'd I never beat it? Well, there's two reasons, and we'll get to that. Underground came out less than a year after the original release, and it's basically the prequel to the first game. In one of the missions, you're even picked up by a pilot named Jimmy Patterson. This time around, you're playing as Manon Baptiste, the same gal that gave Jimmy his direction in the first game. Her character was based on Elena Deschamps, a real-life OSS operator and member of the CIA. In fact, the briefing you get before the final mission is from Elena. Underground is broad in terms of mission variety. Instead of just carrying out sabotage missions, you might be doing espionage, search and rescue. Yeah, not like that.
What took you so long?
But of course, there's still some sabotage. The locations vary a lot more as well. The first game, the missions were all in Europe. This time around, you get to visit Tobruk in North Africa, Crete along the Mediterranean, fight through the catacombs under Paris, and even infiltrate Heinrich Himmler's castle. The level design in this one is much different than the first. They tried to break away from the ultra-linear gameplay, and they did that. But it also added a certain level of frustration to the game, especially playing the two back-to-back. Now if you miss an objective, it turns into a game of hide-and-seek. Not like the first one where you can just look at the objective list and go, it's somewhere between these 2 points. And if you happen to miss an objective, you obviously fail the mission, but you're also met with this little loading screen. The levels also have a lot more elevation built into them. The enemies are now in towers or on rooftops. It adds a lot to the game, but it's also one of the reasons I never finished it. I didn't have the DualShock controller, just this old unit with the D-pad, so I would get fucked by anything in an elevated position before I could get a beat on them. Especially in the later levels when the enemies are all packing STG-44s. Some of the levels are beautifully done. Things like the Sandstorm in North Africa, some of the ruins are really good, and inside Himmler's castle is gorgeous for the time. There's also some Nazi knights running around Himmler's castle. I don't know why, and it seems weird and out of place, but okay. There are some major changes to the gameplay as well. While the look and feel is pretty much the same, there were plenty of things added. The first is the escort style missions, or even just fighting alongside allied soldiers. And it's not like most escort missions in games where the person you're escorting is completely useless. In Underground, your allies will pull their own weight for the most part. Next up is the vehicles. This time around, you're not just destroying stationary vehicles. There are times when you'll be up against tanks, half-tracks, and these annoying motorcycles with sidecars, and they always have the most ridiculous entrances as well. The tanks are really well done. They move continuously, have a fully functional turret, and hull-mounted machine gun. The nice touch here is you can disable the hull and the turret separately. If you knock out the turret, it'll still drive around and the hull machine gun still works. If you destroy the hull, the main turret will still function, so it's still a threat unless it's completely destroyed. There are usually a few options for taking the vehicles out. There's almost always a mounted machine gun in the area. Grenades or Molotovs will do the trick. Even a shitload of small arms fire if you're in a pinch. But this game also introduces the Panzerfaust, which is here to replace the bazooka. Unlike the first game though, there is a cap on how many shells you can carry. Some of the old weapons are back, the bar, the MP40, stuff like that. And there's also a handful of new ones. The Sten, which is pretty much the MP40 with a faster fire rate. It's a little bit more accurate, but for some reason the Germans are packing this around instead of the MP40. I don't know if this was a miss or just lazy. The Big Joe crossbow is new. Apparently this was a real thing that the OSS used for assassinations. This hideous thing is meant to be a stealth weapon, but the way the enemies are alerted in this game, it's not really necessary. They're either onto you right away or have no clue what's going on anyways, but it's still fun to use. A little short on the ammo. The last one worth talking about is the STG-44. This thing is the bar with a 30 round mag. It's excellent. Becomes a staple in the arsenal in later missions, and god, it sounds good. Outside of that, the only other major upgrade to the gameplay is the undercover system. This shows up again for the first time in Mission 2, which again is also my favorite of this game. You have to steal a woman's identity, lock her in the bathroom while she's taking a shower. Again, you're running around flashing papers, but this time you're also tasked with taking photos. The added fun comes from getting the guards to pose and some of the one-liners they throw out there. It's a gimmick, sure, but it kind of makes things a little more lighthearted while you're running around committing war crimes. There is a turret section in this game as well, where you're in the sidecar of a motorcycle. It's okay, it doesn't really add or take anything away from the game, but the auto aim on the machine gun sucks ass. Again, Michael Giacchino did the score for this one, and I can't understate how well it sets the atmosphere for the game. Like in the catacombs in Mission 1, it just adds so much to the feel of the level. Even in the last mission where you're fighting through the streets of Paris and there's a song blaring over the loudspeakers, it just makes it seem like the resistance is finally getting a foothold in the city. The last couple of missions are a bit of a shit show. Guys with STG-44s and Panzerschrecks everywhere. I died a lot, and the use of the enemy shooting while they're dying is used a lot more in Underground. More than a few times I got killed by a guy with a Panzerschreck as he's dying. Lots of enemies in elevated positions, and again, very tough when playing on this old brick. Final stage of the game is a tough one to get through. Enemies spawn in and respawn after you've killed them. It got to the point where I just had to take a break.
My doctor says I have to cut down on getting paddled or I'll develop something called dead ass.
I came back and just rushed the end, hip firing as I went. Similar to the V2 rocket ending of the original, you get to watch a bunch of Germans run around waiting for the impending doom. But that's not the end of the game. There's one more mission, and it's the other reason why I had never beat Underground. Maybe you thought World at War was the first game to introduce Nazi zombies and devil dogs? Nope. That would be Medal of Honor. Imagine being 10 or 11 years old, coming around the corner and seeing some dogs doing this little jig. It scared the ever-living shit out of me, and I never got through it. Not only do the dogs dance around, they're packing machine guns and rocket launchers. Christ, they're even driving half-tracks. Anyway, you're Jimmy Patterson for this last mission, and the premise is you're investigating a strange distress call.
Can anyone hear me? Hello? Hello? Please! Berlin continues to ignore our distress call! Tell General Eisenhower to send bombers! Wipe this place from the earth!
Although the levels are pretty creepy, the names are great. Where Beagles Dare, Rotten to the Core, good stuff. And these levels are pretty tough. Where Beagles Dare, mostly because you get a pistol and the shotgun. Good for dealing with the dogs up close, but the ones with machine guns and rocket launchers pose a bit of a problem. You gotta use corners to your advantage a lot in this one. Rotten to the Core doesn't get any easier. You get the bar here, which is good, but the zombies' reaction time is so quick that they end up tearing through your health, and they explode when killed. There's also some more knights in this level, and they act as a bullet sponge, and like the first game, you can't shoot through the dying enemies, but the zombies can. Combine that with the sometimes janky aiming, and you're in for some tough fights. I struggled a lot in this bonus mission. Throughout these 2 levels, you'll find some body parts, and it all makes sense once you get to the final level. Turns out there's also some experiments with animatrons going on in the castle. Those parts you picked up, you can now put together and build your own little ally. The good old days when you can rip on a stereotype, eh? Having an ally in this level comes in handy, but it's still tough. You're fighting against other Panzerknackers, and they tend to stun lock your buddy if they shoot first, which will kill him pretty quickly. It took a few tries to get through this one, and right at the end you're stuck dealing with a tank with not much more than your small arms. And that's it, you're done. Of the 2 games, I do prefer the original. I found Underground way more punishing than it needs to be. Being able to use thumbsticks made it way more playable, but the constant enemy respawning got to be a bit much. There are a bunch more games in the Medal of Honor series I could cover, as I only ever played multiplayer in those other ones. Maybe one day.